Anniversary in the city of Marina, and if you all have any ideas of how we can get Mark to come back a third time, we're always looking for ideas.
Don't jinx it, Karen, come on.
Yeah, brainstorming. But anyway, Mark is kind of a local treasure. We love him. He's the executive at the Manistee Historical Museum. Probably got that title a little off.
Executive director, yeah, but executive's good. Yeah,
Okay.
Makes me sound even more important.
But we're just thrilled that he's here. He's a Manistee native. He graduated from Manistee High School in 1998. Did a little bit at West Shore before going off to Central Michigan, where he graduated with his major in history. And in the spring of 2011 is when he joined the Manistee County Historical Museum. And we're just thrilled that you're here. And I'm going to let you do your thing.
Absolutely.
And get out of the way.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here once again. Yeah, I had that a major in history and a minor in cinema studies, and so when I graduated college, that made me instantly employable, by the way. But I came back to Manistee, and a blessing or a curse somehow ended up at the museum, and all these years later, I'm still there. But I'm very happy to be here this evening talking to you about really an interesting aspect of Manistee's history. On the surface level, the city marina and the history behind River Street's West End maybe isn't the most fascinating thing in the world, but really when we break it down, which we're going to do this evening, it's actually, I had a lot of fun putting this thing together, and it's actually, to me anyway, very interesting. There's a lot of talk about, I'm going to talk about a lot of buildings. I'm probably not going to be able to answer your question, Jeff, about the three or four grave sites you found here. But we might be able, unless one of them Jimmy Hoffa, I don't know. But we might be able to answer maybe a couple of those things, but at least maybe give a clearer idea. So I'm not going to talk really about the construction of the original marina or the construction of this building. We kind of know those stories, and it gets a little dull. So this is going to be mainly on, the development of this whole portion here that we're standing in, the people that were behind it, the movers and shakers, a specific committee that was involved when all that this became developed, so on and so forth. So without further ado, let's just kind of start into it. Before I give talks, I'd like to give this quote by General Byron M. Cutchin. He was a Manistee guy. He was a teacher. He was a prosecuting attorney here in the city. He went on to the Michigan Congress, was a brigadier general in the Civil War, was a recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor. In 1876, he gave a talk right near the corner of Maple Street on River Street. And this is one of the things that he said. The past is the teacher of the future, and as the surveyor corrects his courses by an occasional backsight, so we as a nation and as communities may correct our errors by occasional reviews of the course we have already run. Basically, a really cool way to say, history repeats itself, and so we have to pay attention to what happened before. To go along with that, I love this quote, like sands through the hourglass, so are the days of our lives. We all know that from the NBC soap opera Days of Our Lives. Especially I found that as I get a little older, you have breakfast, you brush your teeth, and you go down to the museum, and before you know it, you're back home doing the same thing. So it means a lot more as we get older. But few remember that it was actually Socrates who said it originally. We have Bill and Ted from the movie Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure to thank for that. And he was a really good Socrates was a very good skateboarder, by the way, too. This is really dumb, but I have to put something in there to kind of shake things up a little bit. But like sands through the hourglass, so are the days of our lives. So we got Socrates to thank for that. A couple of topics that we're going to look at today. Manistee 101, basically the nuts and bolts of how Manistee got to be the way it is. Just the basics. A little bit of a backstory, and I think a D.L. Filer in getting our bearings. Who was D.L. Filer? He played a part in the development of this area and kind of pinpointing out some specific buildings. Also, what about some of these other buildings? We're going to talk about a lot of buildings today, like I said. And musical chairs with buildings and a new committee. Today is Tuesday. Ideal riverfront property, the marina, and epilogue. So in about 4 hours, when this is all done, you guys will be I'm kidding. We'll get you home in time for Jeopardy, because that's really what I'm aiming for. But anywho, without further ado, let's go in chapter 1, Manistee 101. 1840, 1841. John, Adam, come on now, and Joseph Stronach arrived in Manistee in about 1840. And they started kind of scoping out the place and discovered that it would be a great place to do logging, to set up a sawmill. And this is exactly what they did the following spring in 1841. They set up the first sawmill, the steam-powered sawmill, right around here, today's US 31, right around where the state police post is located, right around there. And basically this was a starting point. From then on, people often come to the museum, they want to know how their relatives arrived here. And for the most part, well, they had a connection here, but word of mouth. Why did they choose Manistee to live and work here? Basically, there were lots of jobs available, plenty through the lumber industry, plenty of lumber, and it was word of mouth I got around. That's kind of how it started, and it expanded from there. These are just a series of pictures just to get you in the mood, the setting. This is, of course, really cool, one of those really cool logging pictures of these cool guys out there. Civil War era. Before the Civil War, the population in Manistee was around 1,000 people or so. And then throughout the 1860s, there's a humongous population boom. And rapid growth and development, a lot more infrastructure, sawmill set up shop, a lot more logging going on. It just becomes a really happening place. And this is a series of pictures from around that time. This is in about 1869, 1870. These are the earliest pictures that we have at the museum. This is kind of a panoramic view, and this is looking basically on First Street, looking east for the most part. The most significant structure in this picture is this right over here. And this is Maple Street Bridge, the first Maple Street Bridge. Now, this is a really interesting structure, mainly because it was owned by the Manistee Bridge Company. And in order to cross that bridge, you had to pay a total of 5 cents. And so if you were going from south to north, you had to pay 5 cents for each person in your party. Likewise, if you were going north to south, you had to pay that toll again. So now, this was a big thing for the Catholics in Manistee, and they were really upset, because the Catholic Church at that point in time was located right across this bridge along 5th and 4th Street, today's 5th and 4th Street. So if you wanted to go to a Sunday service, you would have to pay 5 cents, not just for you, but for your entire family. So if you had a big family, you'd be paying 5 cents. In today's dollars, that's about $1.20. But to go back and forth. So now imagine today if you're going to go to the Catholic Church and Father James was over there across the street over here, you'd have to pay $1.20 to listen to one of his 25-minute homilies, and that wouldn't be fun after a while. So after there became a lot of dissension back and forth from a lot of different people, even some of the lumbermen got involved. Why are we paying this toll, and so on and so forth. But the thing about this bridge is that it burned in the Great Fire of 1871, and that was the end of the Manistee Bridge Company. So, but really significant structure early on, especially at this point in time, 1869, 1870. This is another view. This is a continuation of that. Once again, kind of going down First Street. And this is right up here on the corner of First and Oak Street. This is the first iteration of, well, this would be the Union, well, called the Union School, later the site of Central School and Woodrow Wilson School. Just to give you an idea of kind of what this area was like around that time. Again, heavy logging. Manistee River, on the River Drive. These cool guys sharpening axes. And this is one of the big sawmills. This is the Louis Sands sawmill. So, after the Civil War, huge population boom. It gets to be a really happening community because of the sawmills and because of all the different ethnic groups that were a part of this area. And so there were German, Irish, French, Polish, Scandinavian. So it just became a big community. So kind of moving forward with that, this is Filer and Getting Our Bearings. So what does this have to do with anything? This is Mr. Filer. Mr. Filer is one of those cool guys who's got one of those cool beards, and I get really jealous of those kind of guys. And he probably likes a good IPA these days, you know, and can play acoustic guitar, one of those cool guys. But that's Mr. Filer. And he was the father of E. Golden Filer, D. Warren Filer, Frank Filer, and then he also had a daughter. So three sons and one daughter he had. And he was kind of a makeshift doctor and a businessman and a teacher, and he had all these different things going on. He arrived here in the 1850s and then kind of grew to become a very prosperous businessman. And this was his partner, Mark Tyson. I don't have a picture of Mark Tyson. This is Donald Sutherland, one of my favorite actors. But we're visual people in 2025, so we need an idea of what these people look like. So Mark Tyson was kind of a partner / silent partner of in several business dealings with Mr. Filer. 1865, Mr. Filer and Mr. Tyson are operating a sawmill right in this area, right directly across the street from us, where the Chippewa cottages are now today. So they purchased that in the early 1860s. By 1865, something disastrous happens, and there's a fire. Believe it or not, a small forest fire is how they describe it in the newspaper of 1865. Now, a forest, when you think about it, how we think about the area today, there's trees here, but really not enough to maybe constitute a forest fire. But once again, that gives us an idea of how barren and just kind of how undeveloped this area was at that point in time. That there could be a sawmill here. Happened in place, but still very barren as compared to how we know it today. 1865, Mr. Filer and Mr. Tyson's mill burns to the ground. So what happens? 1 year later, in 1866, Mr. Filer decides to start developing Filer City. Filer City doesn't officially become organized until 1868, but in 1866 he starts to develop it because he had significant lumber interests around the area, and then set up a small sawmill which grew to become a big sawmill. But what eventually happens about 3 years after this, in 1869, is that he moves to Ludington and sets up his business interests there, and his sons continue to operate the mill. E. Golden Filer and D. Warren Filer, and then his other son Frank Filer joins him in Ludington. Now, if you were to believe social media today, he probably left Ludington because they got all the good stores and all the good restaurants, but there's more money to be had there, business interest is basically what led him there, and that's where he continued to stay for the rest of his life. I always like to imagine what if that sawmill hadn't burned down. How would the River Street have changed or developed as we know it today? Gosh, it's a possibility that I would imagine it would have helped, but I'm sure it would have been quite a bit different. It might have been quite a bit different than how we know it today. And it's a possibility that Filer City might not have even been a thing. But regardless of that, what do they do with the land after there's a fire there and it's destroyed? Their mill is destroyed. Well, they sell it off, and then eventually those lots are subdivided. And so roughly around 10 years later, by the mid-1870s, the land starts to get developed even more. This portion of River Street, Filer and Tyson's addition, which we're standing on now, this is the Manistee River. This is where we are now in this vicinity here. So what were some of the key locations when we're talking about how this area was developed, and what were some of the buildings that were located on the site that grew the community? One, of course, was right across the street from us where the mill was, and that was the Dunham House. And that was built in 1878. Later on in 1917, it became the Hotel Chippewa. And then in 1985, it was burned to the ground. 1985, this is one of those landmark days where people come to the museum and they go, you know where I was at the end of March in 1985, where were you when Kennedy was assassinated? This is like a Manistee landmark. I was in school and I remember that we came down here, I was working, I saw the smoke, but this was a big deal in town. So that happened almost 40 years ago today, about 6 weeks from now in 1985. But it started out as a Dunham House. It came it was constructed in 1878 and became Manistee's premier hotel. Right across the street, in that where this triangle is right out here, there was another hotel, but they didn't start out originally as that. This, what I usually refer to as a Metropolitan, believe it or not, this structure sat, for the most part, on that triangle that's out there right now where the fountain is. It was a little bit bigger at that point in time, but for the most part, that's how it looked. You know, I got to move around a little bit because I'm getting a little stationary here. You can all hear me, right? All right. All right, so this is the Metropolitan Hotel, and this is where it was located, right over here across the street where that triangle is. And it was built, portions of it were built in the late 1860s, but then it expanded. It was added onto in the 1870s. And so one of the things to remember about this, it didn't start out as a hotel. It was a doctor's office, and then this is where the first post office was stationed right inside this building originally. This building later became the Metropolitan Hotel. After the post office moved out, it later became, after that, an annex to the Hotel Chippewa. It was the Hotel Chippewa Annex, and then by the 1930s it was torn down. But the post office moves from that building to this building right across the street over here. And so this is where the post office was for roughly about 30 years or so. I don't have a picture of the outside of it at that time. This is a picture of the inside that shows all those cool guys and all they're dressed up to the nines and they're sitting there posing in the post office for a picture. I always like that picture. In 1910, really by 1911, this building was constructed for the post office, called the Federal Building. So this kind of became a thing. About 1909, they wanted to expand the post office and make a kind of a big grand gesture, and this is what they came up with. This is one of those things where we kind of we're going to tell you to remember this, because it's going to pop up in another couple minutes or so. So to remember this building, because it's going to play an integral part, and maybe a small integral part into how the marina developed. So. Another building that was located over here was the offices, or I should say the docks of the Flint and Pierre Marquette steamer service. So people would come here. This is right around this area over here. It later became Michigan Transit. But the big steamers would pull up here and drop a lot of people off from Chicago, Milwaukee, so on and so forth. So that made a big influx of people into this area. And then later on in the teens, right across the street over here, where the Little River Bend economic offices are now situated, was originally the depot for the Michigan East and West Railroad. This didn't come on until later, but it still kind of added to this whole idea of all these kind of 5 locations, hotels and post offices and docks, and then later on this depot to visitors, brought people into the area. So there was a large influx of commerce and people coming, not every season because of the water freezing over, but for the most part, a lot of people coming into Manistee. So it was very busy and it was very active. Part of the community, this west end of River Street. Moving on just a little bit more. So I talked about some of those key locations, but what about some of these other buildings that kind of don't get a lot of notoriety, I should say. Kind of looking over here, this is the river right over here. Right over here, of course, is the Elks. To kind of get you where you get your bearings a little bit. There's the Elks, and then there's the vicinity of where Francanos is now today. But then there were these other buildings that were situated here. Just kind of those kind of weird things that we just don't really have any idea, because a lot of us, well, some of us don't have a memory of them. So you had over here the Elks, you had a tailor shop over here, and then this was, I forget what this was originally, but I think it was some sort of saloon at one point in time. Another saloon over here, of course, the post office. This is right across the street over here. You had grocery stores and meat markets, and another saloon, a confectionery store. All these places that people could shop and go to. Continuing on, Right across the street over here, you had a bakery, and guess what? There was another saloon in there as well later on. All these other things to kind of, this is what this building here on the corner originally looked like. So very extravagant, very big. I think there's an advertisement for a saloon over here, and there was, I think, a laundry in one of these buildings as well. And then kind of continuing on from there as well, right across the street, there was an auto garage, which was a big deal when it was built, when automobiles were becoming a big thing. And then again, right across the street over here, there was the offices for the Canfield and Wheeler mills, and then later became used as a violin factory. So in the 1890s, you have something like this, and this is a view of basically looking west from near Oak Street. And we're going to blow this up a little bit. Point out a couple things for you. Here's, just to give you an idea, here's the Dunham House Hotel Chippewa. Right here is the Metropolitan / hotel / post office. And then over here is this pesky old sand dune that we can talk about for hours too, but we won't. Creeping Joe. And then right over here is where the waterworks is located. So, not exactly a hopping metropolis in this picture here, but it gives you an idea of what this area used to look like, this specific area. And it was populated by really cool buildings, a really cool sand dune in the background, these hotels. Just kind of gives the city, it's almost unrecognizable. We kind of don't recognize it today. But this is what it looked like about 1890 or so. Musical chairs with buildings, and a new committee is formed. What do I mean by that? So we have to take a look at what, I talked about the lumber industry very briefly and how that brought a lot of people here. So that we find that by about the turn of the 20th century, by about 1900, there's about 14,500 people here in the city of Manistee. Kind of hard to imagine today, but that's what it looked like. As my friend John Perschbacher would always point out to me, Manistee, how we see it today is one thing, and how it used to be, even during his childhood here in the 60s, it was completely different. The landscape was completely different. It was made up of all these other cool buildings and everything else, and John's pointed out that to me many times. But it was looked completely different. So about almost 14,500 people here by the turn of the 20th century. By about 10 years later, or I should say about 20 years later in 1920s, it's about 9,500 people. So about 5,000 people leave. And why do they leave? Because basically the lumber industry is done and it's gone. People try to seek employment other places. The city kind of joins up with the Board of Commerce to bring in these smaller industries during this time period. So you have a boat factory, Century Boat Factory, that comes here in the 1920s. That's one of them. That violin factory I mentioned before. You have an underwear factory, and all these other smaller things that some of them stick around for a couple years, and some of them stick around for decades. Like Century Boat. Some of them work, some of them don't. Like the underwear factory, it just goes away. By about, as I mentioned, 1920, you have a community that's starting to become a little depressed. Population leaves, and so it becomes a smaller community. 1961. Remember, I told you about this building here, this new post office that they're building, and this kind of becomes kind of an instigator for other things. In the early 1960s, John F. Kennedy, his administration, basically threw a lot of money for communities to build new post offices. And this happened here in Manistee. So in about 1961, they decide to, some of that federal money comes to Manistee, and they decide to build a new post office, which has the worst parking in the whole city, by the way. You know what I mean? Oh my gosh, you got to park at Dollar General to get some stamps, and it becomes a big thing. But besides that, I could go on about that for a while. But besides that, they built a new post office on Filer Street, and it's completed in 1962. It's all moved in from the Maple Street post office that was built in 1910, 1911. That's emptied, and by early 1963, all that building on Maple Street, the old post office, is basically vacant, making this the post office in town. In 1963, a group of local businessmen, industrialists, and city officials decided to kind of put their minds together to try to figure out how they could move the city offices from this building here, which is now a parking lot, by the way, to this building here, the old post office. And it kind of becomes a long, drawn-out thing. There's a lot of bidding back and forth going on with government officials in Chicago, and these group of guys are pretty steady in their thinking that they want that building. And long story short, they eventually get the old post office building, and it makes it official in February of 1965. And this is Nate Williams and the city manager, and I think there's another gentleman who's some sort of government official, I forget. But they were some of the guys, the movers and shakers in this whole deal, along with many other people as well. But they purchased the old post office for $20,500, and it soon enough becomes the new city hall. And there it is. A couple days after this is kind of talked about in the Manistee News Advocate, and once it's announced that the city has now purchased the old post office, they have an editorial, February 3rd, 1965, "We have everything. A discussion last night of whether a city-owned marina would pay for itself if it could be financed through revenue bonds to be paid off by rental of slips hit a nerve. A statement was made that a marina would pay off in Charlevoix or Traverse City, but why not here? Why not here? Manistee has," I'll read you a little bit more of this because it's kind of interesting, "Manistee has many water resources and natural beauties as any other city in the state. Lake Michigan, Manistee Lake, and access to both the Little Manistee and Big Manistee rivers. We have sandy beaches, which are under extensive development, fishing, which is counted among the finest in both the state and the region, tennis courts, and an outstanding summer theater." Listen to this next one. This is actually real. I have this here in my hand. The actual copy of the editorial. "We also have one of the best small city historical museums in the nation, for God's sake." And then it also continues on. It says, "In fact, City Council should appropriate $500,000 every year to the museum." Anywho, it does say that about the best city, and so I think it still is, and I think a lot of people probably do too. In addition, we have a solid basis of industrial employment behind us. Perhaps in this feature, we are among the most favored smaller communities of the state. The only element we lack to become one of the top resort spots is confidence in ourselves, a realization of just what we have here." And I think that's kind of interesting. Whether we should have a marina right downtown, as was discussed, and whether it would pay off with little expense to the taxpayers, we leave to those who have facts and figures on marina usage. So February 3rd, 1965, that's an editorial in the News Advocate. And I'm going to tell you to remember this again too. I use this a little too much. I like Star Trek too. What can I say? So there you go. Along the same, this is part of a newspaper article from the Grand Rapids Press in March 12, 1967. It kind of jumps around a little bit from that 1965 editorial, but it kind of leads up to why a new committee was formed. So the Grand Rapids Press, in an article dated March 12, 1967, is quoted as saying this: "Their town had been called Grubby by 375 persons moved out between 1940 and 1960. Businesses closed. Buildings were left abandoned. The city took on a ghost town appearance. Citizens became apathetic, and no one seemed to care." Kind of sounds like today in a little way, when you kind of think about it. I don't mean that in any disrespect, but it's kind of seems like a ghost town sometimes. Citizens become a little apathetic, and no one seemed to care. The Grand Rapids Press, March 12, 1967. So, of course, what happens, Lumbertown, smaller industries, people leave. I don't think it was much of a ghost town. I don't picture that in the late 60s, or in the early 60s. To certain people, the area started to look a little dirty and a little unkempt and a little uncared for. Another quote from that same article by Jack Barstow, who was the district manager of Consumers Power Company at that point in time. He asked, how could local industry expect people to come to Manistee to work? Or how could new businesses and industries be expected to locate here with the community looking the way it did? Whew, golly. Well, that's a lot. So what did they do to try to combat this grubbiness or the kind of the reputation, supposedly the reputation of Manistee being kind of a dirty town? They, via the Manistee County Board of Commerce, a committee was formed whose purpose was to bring about a more beautiful and cleaner Manistee. And that committee was called the Tuesday Committee. I don't know, some of you probably know about the Tuesday Committee or were here when the Tuesday Committee was a thing. And we're going to launch into kind of what they did, and that all leads up to this Marina. So, chapter 5, today is Tuesday. And that makes sense here in a little bit. Who were they? They started out 1965 as 5 local industrious or leaders of the community. You had Lester Glenn, who was the head of Glen of Michigan. You had Dwayne Parks, who was head of the Manistee County Savings Bank. Bill Henry was the editor of the Manistee News Advocate. Harless Fagans was with Lester Glenn in the Glen of Michigan management. And Jack Barstow, who I already mentioned, was the district manager for Consumers Power Company. So those were the 5 guys who kind of started this thing. This was part of their Articles of Incorporation. And I will read part of this. The aims and objectives of the committee are to encourage all types of property owners and tenants to engage in a continuing program designed to eliminate unsightly buildings in areas in the city, and where appropriate, to repair, rebuild, and improve sound existing structures, and then to maintain these structures and areas so that they will be an asset to the city and to the owners and or tenants. We intend to develop a workable, long-range plan to clean up and beautify the natural assets of the city, the beaches, lakes, and the Manistee River. We intend to strongly urge the city to institute an immediate program of street, curb, and sidewalk repair and maintenance, and to impartially and justly make use of the various ordinances relating to the unsightly buildings, noxious weeds, and other detriments to a clean and healthy city. We also intend to urge that city put its own house in order and then keep it that way. Kind of harsh. We also intend to work constructively toward the improvement of Manistee. We realize that to simply remove unsightly buildings is not enough. Proper and beneficial use of cleared areas can result in an improved economic climate for Manistee. And to this end, we intend to encourage the development of Manistee as a good place to do business, to work, and to live. So that was in a special supplement to the Manistee News Advocate in April/May 1965. Why was it called the Tuesday Committee? The first meeting called by Harless Fagans, president of the chamber, was called for a Tuesday noon luncheon meeting. Preliminary discussions were held at this time, and the committee was asked to return the following week with constructive ideas as to how it could best function toward bringing about a more beautiful and cleaner Manistee. Out of these informed gatherings came, over the period of the next several weeks, the committee met each Tuesday. Out of these informed gatherings came the decision to meet every Tuesday. No meeting is called, no one engaged in this work expects to be notified that a meeting will be held. They will be there every Tuesday, bar none. Because the meeting of the committee is as certain as death and taxes, it has adopted the name of the Tuesday Committee. All right. Now, these guys, it was a different day and age, but, nowadays we all go to meetings and we look at our phones and we want to meet and, I'm going to Barcelona, or my 4-year-old's on the hockey team and we're going to Livonia, and 3 months later we meet. But these guys met every single Tuesday and they meant business. Different day and age. And so they didn't waste any time. On that basis alone, they were pretty successful. So that's why it was called the Tuesday Committee. So what did they do? They raised money. $5,000 from a local industry, I see in the newspapers of the time, donated to the Tuesday Committee and their beautification of Manistee. It says local Girl Scouts sold baked goods on River Street and donated $3. Anything they could, and they were pretty successful at that too. They raised a lot of money. They also utilized the Manistee News Advocate for their cause, and primarily because Bill Henry, who was one of those founders of the Tuesday Committee, basically took care of that, and this is what they did. Today is Tuesday, so every Tuesday in the News Advocate, typically on the flip of it, on the front page flip, in the lower left-hand corner, there was a picture with the words, "Today is Tuesday." And it would primarily be the building that either they were going to knock down, or the building that was going to be repainted, or the area where they were going to fix up, again and again and again. But this is one of those buildings. The hard thing about it today is that they didn't provide any address to it, and so if we're trying to figure out where that exactly was, sometimes that can be a little tricky. So this is kind of another couple other examples. A residential house, a residential a building, commercial building. Another residence. Oh my gosh, the museum. That's still. That's one of the buildings that they repainted. It wasn't all about knocking things down, which we're going to further discuss here in a couple of minutes. Basically, it was a case of Manistee's version of urban renewal, the redevelopment of areas within a large city, typically involving the clearance of slums. We could call it slums, but beautification. So as I mentioned, they cleaned things up. They planted things. They painted things. And they tore things down. By 1967, this is kind of what, about 2 years later, these are some of the figures that were described in various newspaper articles about the Tuesday Committee. Directly or indirectly responsible for the raising of some 30 to 40 abandoned or dilapidated buildings. Some of these, as we're going to get into in a couple moments, were commercial buildings. Some of them were residences. Some of them were old sheds that were, falling apart. Launched programs to collect cans and bottles discarded by litterers, collecting 127,000 in a single weekend. Responsible for the installation of sidewalk and gutter construction. Seen that a host of buildings were repainted, including the museum. Installed tree and flower planting programs throughout the city. Whoops, we got too far. Caused junk autos to be removed from parkways. And this is kind of a big one these days. But yeah, they were responsible for spearheading all of that. And remember when I talked about that? Editorial in 1965 about the Marina coming to Manistee? Here it is right here. And they were responsible for that. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more in detail with Chapter 6, Ideal Riverfront Property. Let's see if we can get that going. I have a little trouble there. So to get the marina to be a thing, as was kind of always on their minds, kind of starting with that purchase of City Hall, of how can we reuse this building and tear this other one down. Us and the industrialists and local officials kind of getting together and kind of making this the purchase of the former post office a thing, is basically what kind of happened, what instigated the formation of the Tuesday Committee. And that marina that they talked about for quite a while, and they had actually discussed that as early as the mid to late 1950s, actually, of where talk of a marina, a city marina, continued to be a thing. So how do we make this come true? The Tuesday Committee, with the formation of the Tuesday Committee and their purchasing properties and tearing buildings down, that's how it became a thing, and we're going to go a couple different directions with this. So what did they do in order for that ideal riverfront property to become a marina? They purchased properties with downtown river frontage, basically this area right here, from, I always call it the 440, but it's Francanos. It used to be the Spot at this point in time. From the Spot, the Francanos, all the way down here to Spruce Street. They focused their energies and their purchasing power on these specific buildings here. They purchased those buildings, they raised the derelict buildings that were there, donated that property to the city for a marina. But what did those buildings look like? And so I was thinking about it at the museum. Hold on a second, I'm going to get a drink of water. And I have pictures of what their Today is Tuesday ad was like at the museum, but I was thinking about it a little more, and it struck me early one morning, and I was like, wait a second, I've got aerial views of this city from 1963 that were taken from a plane. So we're going to do a little airplane tour of Manistee that happened on August 18th, 1963, and we're going to show you a couple slides. But first we got to get that propeller going there, get that going, like that. And then we're going to go with, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I got to throw that in there. Didn't know you could fly a plane. So this is where we're at. We're going on the north side, and we're looking at former St. Mary's Church, the third iteration of St. Mary's Church, as well as today's Wagner Center. And this is shortly after St. Mary's Church is opened to the public. Cool things we can analyze in this. We could spend an hour doing that. But a couple things I want to point out to you. The conveyor that would carry the sand all the way from the north side to the river. You can see how far that conveyor goes over there. And there's the formation of man-made lake right over there as well. And all these other houses, baseball diamonds, all this other stuff that we can look around for a little bit longer if we want to down the road. But we're going to move along, and then we're going to take another view of the city in our plane, and we're going to go right over here, take a look at Memorial Bridge and Memorial Drive, and you'll notice that there isn't a bridge over here. Now, we complained about that bridge being closed and all the traffic going through and so on and so forth back when Memorial was closed. But they were actually building that bridge that's there now. So could you imagine all the traffic that would have to be occupied on this bridge to do all this stuff? And it's hard to kind of imagine. But Memorial Bridge, this current Maple Street Bridge is being constructed. We have Kroger's, which later became Olson's, being constructed, and Manistee Manufacturing Company, and hordes of other things that we could spend a long time analyzing. But we'll keep flying along, and then we'll bump into the Rocketeer as we're flying along, and he's flying down there and going and not being able to recover. Hopefully he does. That was really stupid, but I had to put that in there because it was fun. First Street Beach, here's where the Hampton is located right here. And then looking at it now, compared to what it was in 1963, not a lot to do down there at that point in time. But still pretty neat to look at. You can see the Armory right over here. And then finally, we're going to fly the plane over here to the west end of River Street. Again, Maple Street Bridge being constructed right there. The old Century Boat Factory right over here. And we're going to kind of analyze, this is Hotel Chippewa, and City Hall's right over here, or the library's, no, that's City Hall right over there. And we're going to focus our attention on these buildings right over here. The Tuesday Committee purchased these properties in order to have the marina be a thing. And we're going to take a look at what those properties were. But first, we're going to zoom in a little bit, and we're going to get our bearings. So this is, of course, the Elks building. This is 440/Francanos right over there. And then there's this building kind of right next to it, right there. Well, that's one of the buildings that was purchased by the Tuesday committee to tear down. And this is what it looked like from the air. This is what it looked like in the News Advocate when they put the Today is Tuesday banner on. At this point in time in 1963, but by the time the Tuesday committee had purchased it in 1960, in the late 1960s, it was known as Gill's Barber Shop. And that's what that was. And then we look a little bit longer. They also purchased this building right on the corner here. This, at this point in time, was known as Jack's Floor Market.
There's a sports shop in there too.
Yeah, that was a little bit further down over here, and the Tuesday committee knocked that down too. And I don't know exactly what their plans were for that 100%, but you know, there's not any buildings there anymore, so it continues on. This is what Jack's Floor Market looked like when it was torn down. Continuing on. This isn't reaching too much. And this is when Jack's Floor Market was torn down. Floor Mark, I should say. You know, excavating salutes the work of the Tuesday Committee. We are happy to have a part of their plans for beautifying Manistee. And a little further, we're actually a little bit more in the background over here. This whole thing over here. And what was this originally? Well, this was one of the buildings I talked about very briefly. This was originally the location of the Flint and Pierre Marquette passenger docks. Later it became used as a warehouse. The armory was in here for many years before they built their building on First Street. There was also a bowling alley in here too as well. But this was also another one of the properties that they purchased and tore down. And that's what it looked like. And then moving along, this building I showed you a picture of it a little bit earlier. It was originally kind of 2 stories and kind of more unique, but over time, story was lopped off and things changed around. But that's what it looked like from the air in 1963, and that's what it looked like in 1965 when it was torn down. And then the building in back of it as well, right over here. Not the prettiest thing in the world, you know. Maybe this one could have gone, you know. But yeah, once again, all purchased and torn down by the Tuesday Committee. And then you had this building right over here as well. So there were 6 altogether originally, and that's what that looks like. And then later on, these buildings as well were torn down, and as well as the coal yard that was here too. John, as I mentioned earlier, John and I have analyzed this building quite a bit. At this point in time, it was being used as a warehouse. It was originally built as a residence right on River Street. It was really the only house that I know of, that we knew of, that was had a River Street address. So, but that was torn down a little bit after the initial 6 buildings were torn down. You can see this in another couple pictures I'll show you in a little bit. So, okay, this is the end of that. And we're going to end our airplane tour of Manistee from August 18th, 1963. But just to give you an idea of what those buildings look like and how they were there, how they were situated, that speaks volumes, to me at least. And plus you get to analyze all those other cool things in there as well. So number 7, the Marina. Late 1967. There starts to be a lot of not just discussion, they have plans and they hire different architects and they settle on one and then they don't like the plans, and then it kind of goes on and on and on for quite a while. So there's a lot of politicking involved as to how can we get a marina here, how can we get actually docks out there, how can we get a building constructed, so on and so forth. It goes on for a little while. These are part of the initial plans that were drawn up and published in the newspaper of what that original marina looked like. Didn't really turn out like this. Things were kind of changed around. But just to give you an idea of what they were thinking back in the late 1960s. Kind of strange though, they didn't excavate those bodies back then though. You know what I mean, Jeff? You're talking about. Excuse me. 1968. What happens? Eventually, they settled down after about a year in the making, after roughly 3 or 4 years or roughly 3 years or so of planning this out and figuring all this out. They settled on 3 different organizations or 3 different entities that would share in the funds of constructing docks and a marina building here for Manistee. The Economic Development Administration, the State Waterways Commission, they were going to both pitch in $97,500. And then the city voted in a $60,000 revenue bond to kind of cover the rest of the cost originally. This guy was the kind of the guy who was kind of putting all the pieces together and kind of leading the charge after the Tuesday Committee donated the land to the city. Now, Charles Boyer was a local guy. He came here in 1946, and he bought the Barnes Insurance Agency, which later became the Boyer Insurance Agency. And he eventually kind of got heavily involved into politics, became a state rep for the area, and he was also the head of the State Waterways Commission too. So when you're local and you're also involved in state politics, and also the head of the State Waterways Commission, there's probably a pretty good chance that your marina is going to end up being a thing at some point in time. And that's exactly what happened. First, a couple pictures of it being constructed, and so on and so forth. So, of course, again, the Hotel Chippewa, the Dunham House over here, right across the street over here where the Outsider is, that eventually became an auto garage, and then here is where the auto sales were right over here. And then they also had sales right across the street over here too as well. Francanos, and then you start to see the rest of it. Eventually these other buildings, like I said, were torn down. But Spruce Street right over there, and there's the funeral home right over there too. And then kind of switching angles from another view, old Century boat, these being put down in the water over here, and then the base of the building right there. So, you see this sign right out in front here, Manistee Municipal Marina. This boating facility is made available to the public through the cooperation of the City of Manistee, the U.S. Department of Commerce, Economic Development Administration, and the Michigan State Waterways Commission. And there's Mr. Boyer's name right on the bottom, which is great. So the 60-boat marina, A60 boat marina, was dedicated on July 3rd, 1969. As I mentioned, took quite a few years to get everything settled up, with the buildings being raised and everything kind of being politically correct and so on and so forth, so they could eventually make it into a thing. So July 3rd, 1969, and this is what the News Advocate says. We'll accept new marina here tomorrow. The Manistee Marina was dedicated Thursday evening with members of the Waterways Commission here for the event, and Glenn Gregg, Deputy Director of the Department of Natural Resources, unveiled the landscape artist's plans to develop the park area fronting on River Street adjacent to the marina, which will become the Tuesday Committee Marina Park, in recognition of the Tuesday Committee's having set in motion of building the marina by donating 754 feet of Manistee River frontage. Now, when researching all this stuff, I didn't know that this area over here had anything to do with being, at one point in time, named or supposedly named the Tuesday Committee Marina Park. I didn't know that. So we have them to thank for those shuffleboard courts over there. So, so 1969. Then this picture is a little goofy here, but here's looking right across the river over here, and you can see what the marina building eventually ended up Hotel Chippewa in the back. Taken from another angle. And this is goofy here, I don't know why I'm goofy here. But there it is right there. And again, there it is right there. Now, this picture was taken from another building that was being constructed at the time. Anybody guess what it is? Exactly, Century Terrace. We're going to talk about that very briefly here to wrap it all up. So I've talked about a lot of stuff, covered it in a short period of time, but this is my little epilogue to this whole ordeal. So kind of the small little instigator of this whole thing for Marina and for the Tuesday committee to be formed was the purchase of City Hall and the destruction of the old city building. Let's get rid of this old thing because it needs a lot of work and it needs to be maintained. It's kind of creaky and there needs to be too much to be fixed up, and let's get into this building that we know we can fix up. So City Hall being the old one eventually being torn down and the new one becoming a thing, the old post office becoming a City Hall. The Tuesday committee, we've talked about that. And of course, eventually the Marina. A couple other things that were happening in Manistee at this point in time. You had Century Terrace being constructed. You had West Shore Hospital starting to be constructed around the late 1960s. You had West Shore Community College becoming a thing. And you had a lot of these buildings on River Street, not all of them, but a lot of them, kind of changing the way that they look on the interior, with the false ceilings and other different ornamental things, as well as the exterior with a lot of them. You started to see that a lot more mid to late 1960s. So all of this stuff, what does this all add up to in the long run? It's that word that a lot of us personally and even community-wide don't like to hear a lot. Change. We don't like to hear that. I know I don't. Or if you were to believe any of the comments on Facebook, people love to complain about stuff, and they'll say, "Why did Manistee do this? Why did they do that? We should get this. We should get that." And then we get something, and then they want to complain about it more. So it's just that whole idea of change. It doesn't usually sit too well with people. The Tuesday committee and what their legacy is. Over the years at the museum, people have come in and wanted to know more about them and kind of talk about them in a very negative light. So whether they did positive things, which I believe they did, but it also would have been cool to have these old cool buildings kind of still standing here, or if they did negative things, by tearing all that stuff down. That's really up for you to decide. So it's kind of a double-edged sword to a degree. But they instigated a point in time where Manistee needed to change and needed to kind of grow into something else or have other things or newer things, what have you. But suffice to say, what they did and how they went about it, whether that's positive or negative, is left up to you. In closing, I like to give you one more quote, and this is from one of my favorite movies called Top Secret. It's with Val Kilmer, and it's by the same guys who did that movie Airplane with all those good funny jokes. And Top Secret is a spoof on spy movies and war movies and Elvis movies, and it's a great movie. But it's one of my favorite quotes from it, because when we talk about history, we talk about things, we talk about change. History is change, whether we like it or not, positive or negative. And I always get a kick out of this, so that's why I leave it. Things change, people change, hairstyles change, and interest rates fluctuate. And that's all I got for you tonight, folks. Ramble on a lot, so. And I got done in an hour too, so. Anywho, with all that said, I rambled on a lot. Are there any questions or comments?
Do you know why the park changed its name then from the Tuesday?
I do not. I don't know. It was on my list of things to try to figure out, but I didn't have enough time to bother Heather up at City Hall to look through the minutes and then even do my own research through the newspapers. I didn't get a chance to do that, but that's on my list of things to kind of figure out, just so I have a better idea.
Wasn't there kind of like a road down there? I don't know if there's...
Are you talking about like down and kind of along the Riverwalk type of a thing?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if there was or not.
Kind of what I remember as a kid.
Alright,
There were
let's-
cars down there.
Let's see if there were. John, you could probably
Anybody remember
answer that question.
Well, there was a used car lot. But no, I don't remember anything down there. And the armory was used for making
No,
clothes
it was-
for the high school for the
Like a
4th of
road,
July.
right?
Yeah, well, I mean, you could,
Behind the Manistee Inn.
And that
probably-
was the dock
oh.
for.
you could probably get down there with a car, but you'd probably get stuck. I don't know if that was, you know, accessible or not. Very well could have been. I'm not too certain about that one though. Any other comments or questions? Go ahead, Brian.
First, just thank you.
Yeah.
This is so much more than when I was in Marina. I did not know about the Stronach family.
Yeah,
I did not know about the Filer family.
yeah.
Yeah. Can you just string together why are we called Manistee? Because I
Well, yeah, that's a whole other topic, but the Native American name is probably I've heard it be interpreted a couple different times. Rivers with islands at its mouth, and of course, as people say, it's Spirit of the Woods. I don't know 100%, so that's probably a better question to ask to the folks at the tribe. Yeah, I don't know. Here's the thing about Stronach and Filer. At least there are townships named after them. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. Why aren't we called Stronach County? That's
I don't know about that. That's a good question. I might have to enlist a higher power than myself, but you know, it's interesting when we look at how things are referenced. So you know, the Filer City area, all those places were called towns. So they had Filer Town, and then you had Stronach Town, and that became Pagetville because Mr. Paget eventually purchased or eventually owned a lot of that property there. And then you had, of course, that's where Maxwell Town comes from because Mr. Maxwell, John C. Maxwell, who was a lumberman for a very short time here in Manistee, ended up with some acreage there, a bunch of property, basically 13th Street South. And for some god-awful reason, that was the original Maxwell Town, but for some god-awful reason, Maxwell Town encompasses basically the whole east side of the city. So when somebody asks you where you live, and you say, you know, I live on 5th Street, in Maxwell Town, you know where it is, but that's really not the true property of the original Maxwell Town. Somehow it's encompassed that whole east side. But my point being is that these names of these settlers, these people who settled here, they at least, you know, we have portions of, or parts, or their names as portions of our town. Even like the street names like Michael Street and Sophia Street. Over here off of 5th Street. Well, those are Mr. Michael Engelman and his wife Sophia Engelman, because they had the property in that area, and of course they lived right there on the corner where the Hilltop Apartments are. And there's, you know, Mr. Robinson. Well, why was it called Robinson Street? Well, Mr. Robinson had he lived over there, and he was an old settler, and they named a street after him. Duffy Street, another one. Smith Street, another one. So we have all these names of all these people within our community, but not the bigger community. And that doesn't really answer your question too much, but it's a variation of that. Go ahead, Ramona.
You mentioned there was a boom, there were 1,000 people more
Yeah.
or less before the Civil War.
Yeah.
And there was a boom,
Mhm.
was like 4,000 people there?
I would say probably roughly around 2,000 or so start to be, but it's not just, they don't trickle in here, they just kind of, boom, come in here, you know, within a couple of years. And then it just continues to grow. Any other comments while I'm here? All right, thank you so much for having me. Certainly appreciate it. Always fun to talk about this stuff. If you have any more questions, come down to the museum. More than happy to